Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. And you guys know my habit, if you will, is to welcome our guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things that I personally deem very, very expensive. These commodities is priceless, if you will. Time, 24 hours. Every single human being have the same amount of time. How we utilize it, how we learn to respect it, how we learn to cherish it will tell us a lot about the outcome of your life. The other is the journey. The journey houses much information. It created the individual that is before us today. And that individual is George. And I want to thank you for coming to Threads of Enlightenment to share your journey and your time, precious commodities. I want to thank you so much and for coming and enlightening us here so that we can learn to become better human spirits. George, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, Ken. Great to be here.
It is my honor. Tell the folks how you serve, because I tell people the beautiful thing about when we go through our journey, George, it brings us out to a place by which we are have the opportunity to serve others, to be one that is humble. We've learned something in our journey, and it has brought us to a space where we are humbled to share our wisdom. What are the things that you utilize today to serve others?
Well, Ken, I started out a long time ago interested in how somebody could persuade somebody else to do something.
Yeah.
I started out freelance copywriting while I was teaching English in Japan, and that got me very interested in human nature. I figured the more I could understand about human nature, the more I could persuade people to do things. But after a few years of studying and going to seminars in NLP and hypnosis and conversational hypnosis, I realized the best way to persuade somebody else to do something is to explain it to them in terms of their own interests.
Yeah.
And this is something very similar to what Adam Smith wrote way back in the 1600s or 1700s in the Wealth of Nations. The butcher, the baker, the brewer, they don't do what they do out of benevolence. They do what they do out of enlightened self-interest.
Yeah.
And that's essentially how all trade happens. The best relationship you can make with somebody or create with somebody is where both sides are both getting their needs met. And that's the easiest way to persuade someone. It's not only the best way, it's not only the most elegant way, the most efficient way, it's the easiest way because it requires that you kind of turn off your ego.
Yeah.
And instead of telling them what you think they should be doing, you turn off your ego completely and you ask them about what they want in all kinds of very elegant and hypnotic ways to build up what is called their internal mind map of what they want.
Yeah.
And the more you turn off your ego, the more you build up their mind map about what they want, what they don't want, what they're worried about, the more they will absolutely shine like a beacon.
Yeah.
And once you do that, you will find that there is treasure in other people.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I had to learn that.
And so it's not really about hypnotizing people to do stuff. It's about dehypnotizing them so they can fully appreciate what they really want and get rid of all their mental clutter.
Yeah.
And if you can turn off your ego and just serve the other person by helping them build up their mental mind map of what they want, they will buy whatever you're selling and they will love doing it. And hopefully you're selling stuff that can help them. And that's kind of the other side of the equation.
Yeah.
Because this system can be abused, but it's a very beautiful persuasion model.
Yeah.
So you just kind of turn off your own ego, focus on them, focus on what they want, focus on why they haven't been able to get what they want yet, and help them get it.
Yeah.
And that creates the best relationships ever. And you can do that without talking about yourself at all. You can do that without talking about your product at all. Just turn off your brain, not turn off your brain, but turn off your ego, turn off your desire to tell them what's what, tell them what you think they should be doing, and just build up their internal mind map. And they will just light up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
And they'll remember that conversation for their whole lives.
I remember the system because I was trained in corporate America. I used to do a lot of negotiation. And I remember reading a book about win-win negotiation and implementing those policies and ways. And a lot of it is what you talked about a little while ago. So here we are, George, you at this juncture of your life, as you stated, how you have learned that particular process. We want to go back. One of our customs here at Threads of Enlightenment is to go back and revisit the family unit. This is the space by which we first reside. You and I, mom and dad, bring us home from the hospital. They give it that beautiful kiss. They put us in the crib. We are now home. And these scientists, that I call them parents, are now going to experiment into our life, began to deposit data, if you will. And the data
Experiment.
is skewed based on their perception of whatever trauma they have been through as young people. And so we have these
Actually,
scientists with skewed information, data depositing into you and I. What was that family unit like? Invite us there.
well, I was born in 66. So I was 5 years old in 1972, 73. And that was a pivotal event in American history when, if you know your economic history, that's when America went off the gold standard during the famous or the infamous Nixon shock.
Yeah.
And my parents were both school teachers. I had an older sister, a younger sister. And so when I grew up, my formative years, I was not only a middle child, but I was a middle child in a family that was suffering financially because of the massive inflation that happened in the 70s.
Yeah.
And so they were not financially well off. I remember I asked my parents when I was very, very young, are we rich? And my mom had to give me an answer that sounded good because the obvious answer was no. All I knew was the rich people I saw on TV. And so I kind of, as a middle child, middle children have a kind of a different experience than most other children.
Yeah.
And so my kind of origin story is I was kind of felt like I was left to my own devices more often than not.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of trained me, I hopefully think, to become more resilient than most. And I have seen that resilience come through my life in a lot of ways as I look back on my life. Another thing that was part of my origin story is that I had a lot of bad allergies when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so my mom was trying to fix me by moving me from bedroom to bedroom, rearranging the house so that I could sleep in a room that didn't have a draft. And so I was kind of inadvertently programmed to be a nomad.
Yeah.
So I grew up with a strong sense of self-resilience because I essentially had to. And I was kind of trained to be a nomad.
Yeah.
And surprise, surprise, I've lived in about 3 or 4 different countries as an adult. And I'm just playing out that nomadic lifestyle even today.
Yeah.
I mean, I live in Nebraska now. I've lived here about 3 years. Before this, I lived in Asia for about 15 years, a bunch of different countries and places. Before that, I lived in a bunch of different cities in California. And so I've carried with me this kind of sense of resilience that I had to develop as a means of survival as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of idea to be a nomad, that I go someplace, a job or somewhere, and I kind of get bored quickly and I need a change.
Yeah.
And I've always been trying to research why stuff happens, why the world happens. I've read all kinds of books on economics. I've read all kinds of books on psychology. And as I got older and I got into NLP and persuasion, I just kept this kind of nomadic, never-ending curiosity going to keep discovering more stuff that I can use to help people.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I got to my life now. And I've had a lot of fascinating experiences.
Yeah, as a young man with that type of awareness and learning, if you will, and you're in your high school navigating with your friend, you have your nomadic tendencies and so forth. What was your relationship like with your friends? And did you start to have, if you will, the nomadic tendencies with relationships? Did you bring that into your space at a young age? Or were they long-lasting relationships that you start to develop with your friends?
Well, when you say long lasting, I suppose that's a relative term, but I do have a consistent relationship behavior. And that is when they start, they're fantastic.
Yeah.
And as they go on, we get to know each other, they're even more fantastic. But inevitably, at least this far in my life, I get to a point where I start to feel trapped and I can't wait to get out. And so, yes, I would say that my nomadic tendencies have presented themselves very consistently in my relationships. The longer they go on, the more I start getting itchy feet.
And as you're moving through life and you're looking and you have this nomadic inside of you, as you stated, from your mom moving you back and forth. When you're looking now, as you're growing up, George, and you're looking to your future and you want to expand and go beyond home, if you will, what were your thoughts then? And what situations that happened around you that caused you to pick the direction that you did as a young man, heading out now on your own, if you will, into the college arena?
Well, when I was in high school, I didn't really ever have any discussions with any adult about what to do about college.
Yeah,
I just knew I wanted to go to college. And the main reason is because I wanted to move out on my own. So it wasn't even a question in my mind.
yeah,
I had to go to college and I had to go to somewhere away from home. That was
yeah,
almost like a given without even thinking about it.
yeah.
And because I was so interested in science, I decided to just major in physics because that was one of the cool sciences that I liked. And I really had no idea why I wanted to major in physics. I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. I just needed to know I needed to go somewhere different than where I
Yeah,
was.
yeah. But physics is good. It's a good, it's a space by which you have to dig and dig and
Yes.
dig for
Yeah.
data. So as you are heading, and you know that, because there's a lot of reasons why people leave to go to college. You know, they want to run for this or run from that, or they are pursuing something that they know they want to do. So here you are, you've made your
Mhm.
decision, you're heading in for a couple of things. You're independent and you are in love with your science. When you landed there, George, how did you feel once you were in that space that you had created in your mind, that you have just landed there and you produce it?
Oh, I absolutely loved it. I felt fantastic. I had zero worries, zero anxieties.
Yeah.
I loved going to class. I loved studying. I loved meeting friends, and it was just a fantastic experience. And as I got closer and closer to graduating, my friends would ask me, "So when you graduate with a degree in physics, what are you going to do?" And
Mm-hmm.
I honestly said, "I have no idea. I really didn't. I just figured when that time came, I would then figure out what to do then. But right now in this college space,
Yeah.
I just love this experience. And when it's over, then I'll decide what to do next."
And as
I didn't
you,
have these big plans to do anything.
so you're I guess a one step at a time at this time
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you're moving through. When you got that degree, you're standing on the stage, George. You got all of the thing that you're standing there and you're looking at the world. What did you see after you've gotten anything, and someone who's taking one step at a time, as you stated? Where did you want to go?
Well, I didn't really have any specific place I wanted to go. All I knew was that the best idea I could formulate back then in my still young adult mind
Yeah,
was I need to get a job somewhere because
yeah,
my parents are not going to keep giving me any money. So I need to get a job.
yeah.
I need to take this degree and somehow turn it into some kind of an income stream.
Hmm.
And so that was really kind of my only option. And that's essentially what I did. I moved back home
Yeah,
with my parents, which caused a lot of unexpected friction with
yeah.
my dad, most especially. And I just kept looking for a job. And once I was in that situation back home, my main goal was to get any kind of job that would pay me enough money that I could move into my own place. That was the next step on my journey.
Yeah.
And I didn't really concern myself so much with what that job was,
Yeah, yeah,
only that it was somewhat related to science
yeah.
and I could get enough money to move into my own place.
And what
And
did
so
you
that's what I
get?
did.
And what did you get when you took that job? What position was it, and where was it?
It was a job at a biomedical company that makes medical devices that are used during open heart surgery. And I was working in the laboratory. I worked at that company for 10 years, and I worked as a tech for about 4 or 5 years. And then I managed the laboratory for the next 5 years that I worked there. And that's is probably when I stumbled upon probably the most unexpected lucky situation of my entire life.
Yeah,
And that kind of job, even though it was just a job to get money to pay the bills, I just happened to get super, super, super lucky.
yeah.
And that luck came in the form of the company stock.
Hmm.
When I first worked there, my boss said, make sure to maximize your paycheck
Yeah,
into the stock purchase plan.
yeah,
And I didn't even know what that meant. So
yeah,
because he seemed like a cool guy, I did that.
yeah,
And the 10 years that I worked there, I was maximizing my contributions to the company stock. In those 10 years, the average return of the stock was 36% per year.
yeah. Wow, wow. It's a
And
good
so after
company
that 10
too.
year,
It's a strong company, because I'm familiar with your company that you'd worked with.
Mhm.
Pretty strong company
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah, they're a huge, huge global Fortune 500 company.
Yeah,
Fantastic company.
yeah. So as you're there and you're exposed to the science of it, and you saw what it did for its patients and so forth. You know, you're familiar with the data, and you are
Mm-hmm.
there. What was happening to George when George was getting his paycheck? He's heading home. He's home alone. He's thinking. What were those thought patterns that were circulating in your life at that time, George? What were you looking forward to do?
Well, I got to admit that I probably wasn't looking forward to much during that. The daily job was enough to keep me interested,
Yeah,
and so I didn't really have any dreams about what to do in the near future. I was kind of in a holding pattern.
yeah,
And combined with, and that holding pattern lasted for 10 years because that was a lot of work. I was working 60-hour weeks. And
yeah,
so I didn't really have enough time to dream about what I could do next.
yeah,
I only thought about just working at the company, maybe working my way up in the company hierarchy and who knows what. I honestly did not have any specific dreams or plans about what I wanted to do in the future. My nomadic instinct had been essentially suppressed
yeah,
during those 10
yeah.
years.
What happened as they began to resurface? Because within that 10 years, always a period where you are enjoying yourself, but for some reason, George, they have a sneaky way of beginning to pop back up into our being because it resides there and it's a part of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's as it began to resurface in your life. What was those situations that began to appear in your life that caused you to have these resurfacing, if you will, of that nomadic feeling as you had through your life?
I would have to say it was a very, very subtle way of resurfing.
Always.
It wasn't so much nomadic as in moving around to physical
Yeah.
locations, because the longer I worked there, and this is probably due to my own laziness,
Yeah.
the longer I worked there, the more I became the guy
Mm-hmm.
that knew how to run the lab. And I was like a very, very, very critical employee, which made me not need to worry about other people
Yeah.
getting angry at me for my decisions.
Yeah.
Because if I left, the company would be in big trouble. So I started to come not necessarily a nomad of moving around, but a nomad of my own decision making
Yeah.
without really regarding other people.
Yeah.
And so that kind of made me wake up my nomadic feeling. And I mentioned the stock plan before.
Yeah.
And after about 10 years, the company, this was in 2000, and that was when there was a lot of mergers and acquisitions
Yeah.
in the United States. This company bought another company in Minnesota, and they asked me, do you want to come to Minnesota and run the lab there?
Yeah.
And that was when I had a big decision to make, because if I went to Minnesota, I would still probably continue with the same company, maybe even today.
Yeah.
But I had this one fantastic mentor that kind of helped me out, and he kind of helped me see the way the world really works. And I made a decision to not go to Minnesota.
Yeah.
And I made the decision to stay in California on my own and then let whatever happens happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of when my nomadic tendency had reached another relative peak relative to my life. And that's probably one of the most fundamental, pivotal decisions I've made in my life,
Yeah.
to just not take this guaranteed high paying job
Yeah.
in Minnesota and just stay back in California with my stock market money and just see what
Yeah.
happens.
As you did that, because that's a powerful lesson to learn, because everyone in the programming we were talking about earlier, George, is to chase that money. Why? Because it carries a lot of security, status, and all those
Mm-hmm.
other things.
Mm-hmm.
And you looked at that and go, no, I'm going to see what happens as you're
Right,
there.
right.
And you have some security and you're seeing what happens. What did you started to look at, George? Because you mentioned that you had relocated to Asia and all these type of stuff. Because I'm curious as to what was it that within that space that you are right there that caused you to look towards outside of the United States? What was happening in your life that caused you to start looking
Well,
out there?
there was about a 4-year period between the end of working in corporate America and when I decided to go to Asia to teach English. And
Yeah,
that was a very, very kind of experimental time in my life.
yeah,
And one of the things that I was really worried about was when I made the decision not to go to Minnesota, I realized I would still have to maybe get a job somewhere.
yeah,
And this scared me, because I had spent the last 10 years in this very, very focused micro niche kind of part of the economy that
yeah,
I probably wouldn't be able to apply to any other company. So I was worried about having to learn new skills that would hopefully get me another job.
Yeah.
And I remember I bought this. This was back in the day when they had those tapes that people put in their car and they drive around and listen to.
Yeah.
And they had these places you can rent books on tape. And I bought this some type of learning program, accelerated learning or advanced learning, but it was narrated by Brian Tracy, if you remember him.
Yeah.
And it was all about the potential of your mind.
Yeah.
And so I would drive around, just listen to all these ideas. And I thought, wow, this is like so amazing. I can do all this. I could do such cool stuff.
Yeah.
And that got me interested in learning languages. And I went to the bookstore one day. I remember I went to the bookstore and I literally stood there because one of the concepts from the accelerated learning was that if you learn 5 or 10 words per day in any given language, within a year, you can be fairly fluent in that language, at least enough to get by. And that just blew my mind away.
Yeah.
So I literally went to the bookstore and I stood in the language section and I just went eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and just decided to learn a language. And I chose to learn Japanese. So I started learning Japanese. I took a couple classes at a community college, and I thought, I got to go to Japan. So I went to Japan during that 4-year period.
Yeah.
And during that 4-year period, that's when I started studying NLP.
Yeah.
And when I started to run out of the money that I made from the stock market, I learned that you can go to Asia and teach English. And that was something that kind of worried me because you're not going to make a lot of money teaching English in Asia. But I thought this is going to be a fantastic experience. So let's do that.
Yeah.
And so I did that. And that's kind of how it led me to Asia. And I had been studying NLP and persuasion and hypnosis for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So I just carried on that self-study while I was teaching English in Asia. And that slowly morphed into the business that I have now.
How did you, George, navigate it into the hypnosis and the NLP, the origin story of that, if you will? How did you navigate into that?
Well, I'm not going to lie. I met a friend of mine in Japan the first time I went there to visit.
Yeah.
And he was the absolute most attractive, charismatic, natural player you could ever even think about from a movie character.
Yeah.
And this guy was just a natural with the letters. And he said, George, you need to learn NLP. And I thought, NL, what? Teach me, man. Teach me. And I just saw, and he said, I learned all the stuff you see me doing with the ladies, all the way I talk to them.
Yeah.
I learned this by studying NLP. And I thought, okay, I'm going to study NLP.
There's always a good motivation, the motivator of that. I remember, George, I grew up in this in the church, and there's a story with David and Goliath, and most of the preachers talk about it, him standing up there. But the thing that motivated him to go to fight this giant was Saul said, "I'll give you my daughter."
Yeah. There's always a lady in the background, man.
Someone in the background. And this boy said, I'll take you up on that.
Exactly.
And so he went and faced a giant. So I understand what you're talking about. So here you are, you got the motivation, if you will, to head out to your origin story to utilize NLP and so forth. And here in Japan, because you're now in this new culture, you're a ancient culture, ancient mindset that you're going to be dealing with on a daily basis. How did that begin to infiltrate your belief system as you're navigating and communicating with all of these Japanese folks there on a daily basis?
Well, actually, the opposite happened. There's an anthropologist named Brown who wanted to come up with the idea of a universal people.
Yeah.
And similar to how Noam Chomsky came up with the idea of a universal language, his theory is that all humans on Earth speak the same language, just different dialects.
Yeah.
So this guy Brown went around the world to study as many different diverse cultures as he could to find the similar traits that everybody shares. And he found a ton.
Yeah.
So the longer I lived in Japan, it wasn't really a matter of Japanese culture getting into my brain. It was me realizing that Japanese culture was a lot more similar to Western culture that I had anticipated. Because when I went there, I first thought, oh, yeah, Japanese culture, ancient rituals, Shinto and Buddhism. But it was really just the same people doing the same things. Everyone's got problems with their relationships. Everybody's got problems with their kids. Everybody got problems with their bosses. People go to work. They got to make enough money. They got to pay the rent. They got to pay for their childcare. And that cultural thing is really kind of a backdrop to the main story of life, which is just getting your needs met on a daily basis.
Yeah. And as you are there now and you are seeing that, how did you find yourself? How is George handling all of that with that knowledge? How did you begin to navigate your life there at Japan, in Japan at that time?
Well, while I was teaching English, I dabbled in all kinds of online marketing. I started with affiliate marketing, and then I hit on copywriting.
Yeah.
If you can write a good sales page, you can make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so I became motivated to understand human nature enough so that I could write good sales copy. And that's something I can do from my PC in Japan without having to even speak to anybody.
Yeah.
And so I started to hire myself out as a copywriter. And the more I started to earn a little bit of money from that, the more interested I became in human nature.
Yeah.
Not just human nature, but human communication.
Yeah.
And that's been fascinating me ever since. And so as a kid, I was fascinated in science.
Yeah.
But when I shifted through into my time in Asia, I became fascinated in human nature and human language and human thought processes and the structure of human mental maps.
Yeah.
And how you can convince somebody to buy something or why they don't buy something, and these kind of obstacles that we have. One of the things that you learn when you're selling things to people is how to overcome their obstacles.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody has obstacles.
Yeah.
And the more you can overcome obstacles, not just to sell something to people, but to make people feel better about their lives and their future.
Yeah. It's a science that is beautiful when you understand the process, because as I said, I did negotiation, multi-million-dollar negotiation, and being at that table, you have to learn so much that is going on, George, and I know you're familiar with it, especially when you're face to face with the communication and so forth. You have to learn to understand body language, facial movements, and all of those things. I trained my body to be opposite to what they said that. So when they look at me, they misdirection, if you will, and I'd actually train my staff, because in the negotiation they talk about when you close your arms, the people are shutting down and that kind of stuff, all the things. So I had reverse engineer all of that with my staff to train them so that we can, because it's a science between the team. And when my staff saw me with my hands crossed, they knew I was just relaxing, becoming even more focused and so forth. Some of the other ones across the table will think that I'm losing interest. And so we would learn all the science of all those different things. And I love that too, that mind dance. As you were learning and experimenting with that mind dance, if you will, what was happening to you personally, George? What was the changes that you started to? There's a lot of data that you're putting into your mind, and it has some effects, if you will, that will begin to happen to you as an individual. What were some of those effects that you started to notice within yourself?
Well, as I got more and more interested in human psychology and human decision making, I love to study and read books and take notes and take some of the best copywriting letters ever written and just copy them word for word in a coffee shop. And because I was living in a foreign country, where I still had to think a little bit consciously to speak and understand the language, I really, really started to soak up other people's body language in a way that I don't think I would have otherwise done so. Because when someone's speaking, you kind of key on what they're saying. But if they're talking and you have no idea what they're saying, you're forced to pay attention to their body language, at least kind of subconsciously. And I became really, really good at reading people. And when I would teach people, I would have to speak to them like in a one-on-one conversation, and I would have to pay very close attention to their face as I was speaking. If I just started speaking language they didn't understand, I would have to watch for a very subtle change in their facial expression so I could back up and repeat what I said in easier to understand language. And so I just unconsciously, unexpectedly became very, very attuned to other people's nonverbal behavior.
It's a beautiful, like I said, being in that space of negotiation all the time, traveling, that was my lifestyle, that you get pretty attuned, if you will, to the body language. And it's absolutely, when you are there, and as any musician, when a band clicks, when you click, it is something else, to when that clicks with you and you are in that space, as you stated, how to function and how to grab data from that conversation that you're having. As you begin to grab conversation and so forth, and begin to learn deeper about human behavior and knowledge and all of these things. Um, what did some of those common things that you stated, as far as we know about the bills and stuff, what were some of those common human behaviors, if you will, that you began to notice, those threads, George, that you began to notice that if you pull on this particular thread, it'll give you that outcome. As you began to dance with that information, how did you begin to formulate your approach, if you will, when you're dealing with others with all of that knowledge?
Well, one of the things that struck me as being critically important, regardless of the culture, is that family is everything.
Yeah.
And relationships are everything. I learned to almost unconsciously automatic walk through a coffee shop, and I could tell right away which couple was in deep rapport with each other,
Yeah.
which was kind of together but not really wanting to be together.
Yeah.
And by having all the discussions I had with my students and about their families and their wives and their kids and everything, that this is the core foundational element of any society, is the structure of the family,
Yeah.
and that is based on the structure of their
Yeah.
relationships. And so relationships are probably the core driving force of any healthy society.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if relationships are not very strong, you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
But if relationships are very deep, then you're not going to have any problems. And so any kind of relationship, or you can find relationship everywhere. I mean, relationships between salespeople and customers,
Yeah.
between customers and other customers. And so I just started to think in terms of relationships rather than a transactional sale or a transactional payment for a copywriting page. And it's kind of hard to express that through the written word. So I found myself not being satisfied enough with a written word.
Yeah.
I wanted to actually talk to people and communicate with customers and make courses that people could understand and help them with their relationships.
Yeah.
And that was something that just kind of organically evolved. I don't remember ever having any kind of conscious decisions to do that, but that's
Yeah.
just kind of the direction that I went into.
Yeah. And
the longer I stayed in Japan, the more I started to realize that these people, every people on earth, were all really about how to find and maintain good relationships.
Yeah.
That's really what the core of life is.
I agree, man. There's nothing like it. When you come to that and learning how to manage yourself in order to manage your relationships, that correlation when you start growing up, if you will, and becoming attuned to who you are as an individual. You're here in Japan and you're there for several years, and you're not looking to come back into the States because I want to talk as to when you got back and you got into your mind persuasion, all of the hypnosis piece, and when you start putting all of this program together by which now you're going to serve others to make them aware of who they are and how all the knowledge that you've gained over the years are able to help them to become astute as individuals in their life. So you're back in the States. What brought you back to the States, if you will, George?
Well, I was very comfortable in Japan. I really loved teaching in Japan,
Yeah.
and my business was slowly growing in Japan. And my main goal was to not come back to the States until my online business was sufficient to support me,
Mhm.
so I wouldn't have to get a regular job.
Yeah.
And so when that happened, that's when I came back. And I miss a lot of the stuff that I was doing in Japan, but I like being back. Unfortunately, as soon as I came back, my plan was to take this mostly online business. I
Mhm.
wasn't doing any coaching or consulting back then.
Yeah.
Come back to the States, expand this into an offline business, and then go from there and teach live seminars and have trainings. But as soon as I came back, about 2 or 3 months after I came back, that's when COVID hit.
Wow. Wow.
And so I was kind of stuck
Yeah.
again with online. And so I had to spend a little bit more time with the online business and
Yeah.
not offline. But that COVID's over. Now I'm back in the track of transitioning from online to offline business.
How did you adjust when you came in? Because you had your plan, and when you came in, and this particular thing happened to us. How did you settle in, George? Were you a little restless? Did that nomadic feeling got you in that place where you're like,
Yes,
what was
yes,
going on?
yes.
Kind of that. What was that like?
I, I was definitely restless because doing that thing in Japan, I would do my online business in the morning and then I would go teach in the afternoon. And I would have a lot of interactions with people in a
Yeah,
very positive way, a lot of positive interactions. And when I came back to the States, I would imagine that I was going to maintain the online portion and just kind of substitute the positive interactions with people in America.
yeah,
But then COVID hit, so I was kind of trapped. And like you said, I became very, very restless. And
yeah,
I kind of fell into another trap of just doing the same thing every day. And I spent a lot of time not really being thinking about what can I do next, any big plans, because at that time COVID was just starting and
yeah.
nobody really knew what was
What
going
was
to
going
happen. It was
on?
going to maybe kill everybody on earth,
Yeah.
or who knows what was going to happen. So that was not such a happy time for me. I was still doing well in my online business,
Yeah,
and I was still talking to customers, but I wanted to get out into the world and actually talk to people like I was talking to people in Japan,
yeah.
and talk to people and give speeches and have trainings and stuff. And so that's kind of where I am right now. I'm in that kind of transition phase.
Transitioning.
And because of that, I'm really, really excited about where I am right now in my life.
Yeah. So you're
I've got a lot of cool ideas that I can't wait to implement over the next 6 months or so. That it's like every couple of days I come up with another kind of experiment, a social experiment that I can do when I get out in the world and try to talk to people in different ways and try to reach people in different ways and try to train people in different ways.
Yeah, that's what I was. My question was going to be: now that you had all this time, because you were restricted, did it
Yeah.
did it begin to, even though it was disruptive in you, did it expand you in any way as far as your, like you were talking about all the different plans or stuff, or did it just you had to learn how to manage George at this time, because it was something, George, for everyone, because we didn't know if we would ever go out back outside for
Right,
for
right, right,
years,
right.
So how did you handle, man?
Well, I've noticed a very similar pattern throughout the past 10, 20 years of my life. And
Yeah,
that is when things are good, you don't seem to feel too pressured to change anything.
yeah,
But when things go bad, at least for me,
yeah,
that's when I start to really, really, really desperately think of a way to make things good again.
yeah,
And it's these periods that make me the most creative.
yeah,
And the first half of COVID, the first 6 months or so, I was worried that this was going to be it. And if I didn't make enough money online, I was going to have to get some job somewhere that I didn't like. And that forced me to be as creative outside the box as I could. And I did all kinds of research, all kinds of thinking, and I would just brainstorm every day and just write stuff out about what I can do every day. And that's when I kind of had this kind of surge of growth. And once
yeah,
COVID ended and I find myself where I am now, I've got a ton of
yeah,
ideas, way too many to try out in the world. And so that's those kind of dark, not dark periods, but those kind of periods of stagnation where you're kind of forced
yeah.
to step up and do something different. That's when I am the most creative.
But I
Even
think,
though it's the most uncomfortable,
yeah,
that's when I'm the most creative.
I've been teaching people, George, that space right there is where your creator comes out.
Yes, yes.
The fact that you have to find answers within that
Mm-hmm.
dark place will cause you to go deep. It'll cause you to bring data in. It'll cause you to begin to expand your thinking. It expands you, and I tell people, don't be afraid of it. Learn to
Mm.
use it to expand yourself, because it will demand that your creator show up in order for you to be able to function
Yes,
in there, or you'll
yes,
lose your
yes,
mind, Georgia. You will
yes,
absolutely
yes. You
lose
will,
your
you
mind
will.
unless,
It's very easy to lose your
yeah, it
mind.
is. It can be a trap for some, because they suppress that creator, or they don't know how to manage that, or to let it loose, if you will, to really let that creator inside of you loose to do what it's designed to do. Here you are, you've got a chance to let your creator explore, George, and you have created all of these additional things, and you're excited now to let some of that out. We're here. Let the audience know of some of those things that you were able to expand through your creator, and now you are putting in on the platform. You're getting them access to, and that is about learning all about their powerful mindset tool, the mindset, your mind persuasion techniques, all of these things that you have put together. Invite them to some of that so that we can, if you will, whet their appetite, George, so that they can get into your space. Because, guys, I want you to get into George's space, and I'm going to put those data information for those links so that you can get in there. Invite us to that stuff, George, so we can know.
Sure. Thanks, Ken. Nearly all of our products and courses come with a basic 3 structure ideas.
Yeah.
There's the inner game of the communicator. There's the actual communication. Then there's the inner game of the person being communicated to.
Yeah.
And the best way to flourish within any kind of relationship is to first fix your inner game issues, to understand, like we were talking about before,
Yeah.
your own origin story, why you are the way you are, what your childhood was like, and why it's kind of helping you or making you mistake the world for something that's not really is.
Yeah.
And to kind of fix your childhood issues so they don't kind of send out an echo to the current stage, and figure out how you want to live.
Yeah.
And then the next phase is about understanding the structure of human communication, to understand the structure of how to speak in a way that can really speak to other people, that other people can hear you.
Yeah.
And the third phase of that is understanding the basics of human nature outside of your own nature.
Yeah.
The basic structure that we all share. We all have a similar upbringing. We all have almost identical instincts. And once you can kind of master these 3 levels, you can really, really, really become a very persuasive and elegant communicator and create wonderful relationships for whatever purpose you want, whether they're romantic relationships or friendships or business relationships. Once you kind of understand and master these 3 areas, your inner game, your origin story, your outer game, your communication, and the understanding of other people, and you come at this from an ego-free mindset to kind of turn down your own egos and open up the other person as much as you can, that will create wonderful relationships. And we teach you how to do that.
Yeah.
All of our courses, in one way or another, will teach you exactly how to do that in various different situations.
Yeah, I hope you guys are, and those that have been following me, I always tell you to, when you begin the podcast, to, we all know that you start as a listener, but you must learn how to quiet yourself and walk into becoming a hearer. What George just talked about, if you have heard what he talked about, is exactly what you need to get you from A to B in your life, because all the information that he has just in such a short time talked about will bring you from where you are to where you need to be. And everything is based on understanding, as he said, your origin story, because that is important, because you don't need that to bleed into the other aspects of your life, because it will disturb the other aspects of your growth. And once you learn about your origin story, and you learn about who you are and so forth, and you're learning about your relationships and the ins and outs of that, you will change your life in every area. I've done it in my business world. And you have someone who was, I want to say, he became astute in understanding the language of the body and the human mind, because he was placed in a country that caused him to do that on a daily basis. And when someone understands to that level, you have a minefield, if you will, guys, where you can dig deep and grab a lot of information. I'm going to give you guys George's information. I need you to get in touch with him to dig deep, because he will help you to change your life. So, George, here you are. I got a chance to study and listen to several of your podcasts and different things that you were discussing, and I was so excited to get a chance to talk with you. Invite us, George, into one of those conversations, if you will, where you took a person and you were able to guide them, because that's all we do. We are able to guide them to see who they are. And one of those individuals that you had the privilege and the honor, because I tell people that transition, only a servant is able to see that, George. In my life, I haven't seen or heard of someone that is ego filled, that has been able to witness that transition of one person moving from that perception that has kept them in cages to another perception that is able to free them. Invite us to one of those conversations, if you will. And when the person, quote unquote, got it, and you saw that transition and you saw the result of that transition.
Well, one of our most common questions or problems that I deal with clients is they have some type of sales job, and they know they've got a good product, and they know they can talk to someone once that person becomes a warm lead. And a warm lead simply means that the person has specifically asked for a conversation with the salesperson. But the problem comes when they need to contact strangers and ask them if they're interested. And they're almost always terrified for the same reason, because as we are children, we experience probably a million times of expressing our desires, but the parents who are supposed to take care of us tell us to be quiet. And so we kind of train in this cause-effect relationship as children. I'm a little kid. I want something. I'm happy. I'm expressing myself, and I'm told, be quiet. Express myself, be quiet. Express myself, be quiet. And so when we're adults and we want to start a conversation with a stranger, there's this anxiety that something negative is coming, because we've been trained so many times that every time we start a conversation, something negative comes. And so the trick is to go back into your childhood and kind of do all kinds of techniques and talk to your childhood self, show your childhood self this is really only within the context of that family. It's not true in the context of the world. And when people finally get that, when they finally feel that, not just understand it intellectually, but when they feel that, it's a lot easier to talk to strangers and set up appointments and make more money. So that's something that happens quite a lot with our clients, as they learn to separate the adult world from their childhood world and see that this cause-effect relationship doesn't happen in the world. It only happened when they were a kid. And once you separate that, you feel completely free to express yourself in a way that you couldn't do before. And that can help you make a lot more money.
Oh, definitely. One of my favorite things within the process of the whole thing, George, was the cold call. We call it the cold call period, where that was one of my favorite of all the times when I began that relationship, because that interaction for me, I kind of, because you've trained yourself, you kind of know how it is relationship right there. And so I was always excited about that first encounter. And because to me, it was the litmus test, if you will, by which I am able to govern myself within that communication as well. It's still been one of my favorite things to this day.
It's kind of a polarity shift. Before you kind of go through and examine yourself, examine your origin story, it becomes a potential dangerous thing. But once you get rid of that and see other people in the world as just random people that you know nothing about, it can be a source of massive potential.
It is.
I mean, every phone call you make can be something wonderful that might happen.
And you know, again, most of it is dealing with the understanding, as you said, as a child, that fearfulness that we were programmed to accept when we did something. And so we have this fearfulness that of rejection that one has to understand. And as you explained it clearly, that one has nothing to do with the other. And once you get that understanding, that initial conversation becomes an exciting time. And those guys, guys, especially those that are in marketing and sales, this kind of approach can change your life financially. That you have no understanding of what we're talking about. But trust me, I've been there, and I know exactly what George is talking about, and I know exactly how it can shift your life and take away some of those fearfulness that you have, uncertainty of not being able to meet your quotas and so forth. George could teach you how to make that transition. I'm telling you guys, this is some powerful stuff once you understand, and it's not as difficult as you think when you have someone like George that is able to guide you and make that switch, if you will, from that old perception into the new way by which he will guide you and help you to assist you and be able to put some money in your pocket and change your life. George, I want to thank you, man, for coming to Threads of Enlightenment
Thanks for having me.
and having this discussion with us, because what um, your your approach is able to free anyone if they are willing to make
Yes.
and
Yes.
take the time to put themselves within and under your guidance. And so I want to challenge all of you guys that that you get in touch with George and shift your life, man. George, again, thank you so much, man.
Thanks for having me. Great conversation, kid.
Yeah, thanks, man.